Hello, DocNation. It is May 2024, and we are excited to bring to you a very dynamic topic on private equity and changes going on within healthcare. With us, we have Anthony, Neil, and Justin, all co-founders of DocNation, and special guest Marty Nichols with Physicians First Bancorp. And we're going to dive into that here in a moment. A lot has been happening in the last month. We kicked off a petition to stop Medicare cuts. If you haven't seen that, please go check that out. We've got a little over 600, almost 700 people that have signed that. We'd love to double that here in the next month or two. It's not going to take a lot. Share with one friend and have them get plugged in, have them share with a friend. It can continue to have a domino effect to bring the change that we need to see in healthcare. And if you go back to 2000, Medicare has been dropping reimbursement rates by about 1% per year since then. So it's about a 22% cut. Well, it's actually 24% now. I'm going back to 2022 data. And we need to see some real change here. And so DocNation exists to put you back in charge. Doctors have lost control of their industry. And so we're all about bringing to you ideas, content, opportunities, and services to help you get back into the driver's seat with your practice. Even if you're employed, things you can do to negotiate, giving you all those tools that you may need to take back that ground that you lost. Contract negotiation is a huge piece. We're seeing that on the insurance reimbursements. Contracts are sitting for years and years and aren't even being touched. We started up a new client recently, and they hadn't looked at their contracts for 30 years because it was a family-owned started practice, and we're having to dig through the archives to find those contracts, and we're going to see some massive change for them, which will come in handy. So all those kinds of topics we're going to be diving into. And with that, I'd love to have you, Marty, kick it off with sharing some background about you and what you're up to these days.
Yeah, and before I go on to me and stuff, to bolster your point, they took another Medicare cut this year of the 3% in a year with 4% inflation.
Yeah.
So it's really a 7% cut when you look at it over the top of the board, which is crazy. And that's kind of a pretty good segue for me to get into what we're trying to do, or what I'm trying to do. I'm 34 years on the device side of the business. My partner that started this with me came from the medical side. We actually grew up in a small town in Iowa and ended up in medicine by happenstance. He ended up being a sports medicine fellowship trained orthopedic surgeon, and I ended up being a rep, distributor, and then a vice president of a couple of different companies. And still, when we get together and have drinks, we argue who took the better path. We're not real sure, on that. We can debate both sides of that one. But throughout our career, one of the things that we always looked at was a lot of what we're going to talk about today was every year as a doctor, his reimbursements get cut, but his overhead goes up. The same with mine. In the device side, your commissions get cut, the amount of money that you get paid for the device get cut. We've been told that we'd make it up in volume. And when I got into this industry, I'm pretty old, but about 160 in orthopedic years, but 30 years in the industry. When I got in, a really busy orthopedic surgeon, I mean, the really big names, the John Insalls of the world, the Charlie Ings, the Charlie Rockwood down in San Antonio. These guys would see 15 to 20 patients a day in clinic, and they did 80 to 110 total joints a year. But they got paid $5,250 to do the total joint. Then they got paid to round on the patient the next day, and they'd keep them in the hospital, for 14 days. Today, that same orthopedic surgeon, as you pointed out with the Medicare cuts and stuff, for a Medicare total joint, these physicians gross $1,004 per surgery. Their overhead runs 61%. And that $1,004, they have to take care of that patient for the next 90 days, which is the global, side of this thing. And I've spent a lot of my career, some of the patents I have are in robotics and technology and whatnot I was going through. I've spent my whole career trying to help physicians become more efficient. And what we've been told is, look, you can make it up in volume. And we just can't anymore. We've hit the bottom. These guys, a decent, busy orthopedic surgeons doing 300 to 400 joints a year. The real busy ones are doing 800. It's just not sustainable. The mental depression, burnout, suicide rate amongst physicians is one of the highest in any profession, with orthopedics being the highest of the medical deal at 28%. And these people's idea of fixing burnout and stuff is to try and get, like a pizza day or a cookie day, stuff like that, instead of just addressing the real root problem, which is pay these people to do what it is that they're so good at and what they train to do, and then let them do it, what they like to do. The burnout is coming because doctors want to help people. I truly believe in the 34 years and everything I've done, it's not that I haven't met a few bad doctors and I haven't had, some that I didn't necessarily agree with. I can honestly say for everyone I've met, it is a passion, it is a calling. Being a physician doesn't just happen. People don't get into it just thinking, I'm going to make a lot of money, so therefore I'm going to suffer through all this stuff. It's a passion. Yep. And that's something I really appreciated. So what we're trying to do with this is we're trying to create an institute through a bank holding company, and we're trying to bring doctors into the business of medicine, and we're trying to create a vehicle that will not only better service physicians, because big banks like big hospitals don't really understand the physicians' practices and they're not really their friends. We're trying to create a vehicle that allows the physicians to keep a little bit more, not necessarily make more. We'll get into this with PE, where PE is about taking away. All we're trying to do is to allow physicians to keep a little bit of the revenue that they make, in the hopes that that will allow more of them to stay in the practice, and then possibly get to spend a little extra time with each one of their patients. If they could, cut their patient load back and their surgeries back from 400 to 350, and still have the lifestyle and stuff that they want, they could spend a little bit more time providing care. So that's kind of the basic premise behind PF Bancorp, or Physicians First Bancorp, and we can talk more about that.
Yeah, we'll dig into that for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of other good stuff we can talk about here.
Anthony, what were the numbers that you were just looking up a moment ago with United?
Oh yeah, United Healthcare just posted not just posted, but their Q1 earnings were around 25 billion revenue, and not revenue, profit. And it's crazy because we thought last year, they did really well. And, I talked to some people in the financial edge, like one of our kids' mothers is head of hedge fund. And she said, if you're going to buy a stock, buy United stock. It's a rocket ship straight up. And if you pull back that onion and think about it, how are they making money? They have no value, right? Like, look at NVIDIA. They have, AI systems or some chips. Look at Tesla. They have cars. Look at, any stock out there. They have good, tangible assets. And all United Healthcare has is that they figured out a way to make money off of sick people, right? They saw all the money that there was in medicine. And they said, hey, I think we can do a good job of siphoning some of that off. And part of what we're talking about here is always that pie getting smaller and smaller for doctors. And I think the health insurance companies have done an excellent job of making that pie smaller. And now, it was funny, in the same conversation I was talking about United Healthcare with someone this weekend. We were talking about PE getting involved, and they just said, just watch out, because that's going to roll, and your pie's going to get smaller and smaller, and it's going to get bigger and bigger. So I think we're just starting to see it, and it's only going to keep going downhill for us. And the physician isn't very good at making their pie any bigger. We just keep getting it smaller and smaller and saying, okay, and doing what Marty said. We want to take care of patients. And another thing I'd like to say to Marty is, they always say, yeah, more volume, you can maintain your 3% cut a year. The real person that suffers there is not only the physician getting burned out, but the patient. And I think we all know, as patients ourselves and as feedback from our patients, that the 15-minute appointment to set up a surgery, or 15-minute appointment for a sick visit, is not cutting it in medicine right now. And I think that displays in how healthcare is being perceived in America, right? We're not in the top 10 list. We're not even in the top 50 list in some categories of first world countries. And that's embarrassing for how much we spend on it. All the money is not going into healthcare, though. It's going into pockets of players that know how to take the money out of systems.
It's really interesting, that very, the stats and stuff you put out there with this, and within the physician aspect. We've allowed the industry in the world to convince people that physicians are rich because of how much they get paid. Yet if you listen to Justin's opening, they've been cut every year for the last 20 years. their reimbursement has been cut every single year. Physicians make the money they make not because of how much they're paid, but because of how hard they work.
That's right.
And that's why the burnout, and that's why the problem stuff is we keep working them harder and harder. And there's too many people, and this is probably one of the biggest challenges I would put to PE and that we need to be talking about stuff is, how many players can we have come in that don't actually do any provision of care, that don't have any touch point actually of care, but are taking something out of the system?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, go ahead, Justin.
I was gonna say, to that point, we're talking about aligning objectives and priorities, and what value, what asset, what tangible difference is United providing. Marty, let's go ahead and dive into the PE side. And something that you shared with us as you see the landscape had to do with what is the outcome that the PE groups are promising to bring to the table, and how there's never any mention whatsoever that patient care is going to improve, or patient outcomes are going to get better, or patients in general are going to get healthier. That's never a part of that. So talk to us about what are the priorities of PE?
Not on any of their pages. Even when you go out to their web pages, they don't even waste their time, talking about that anymore. And if you look at it, the papers that were published out there on cost of healthcare, there's roughly about 12 really good studies that were published on this. And 9 out of the 12 studies, all PE did was increase the cost of care, right? And this is one of the challenges we have with a lot of this stuff. There's always two sides of I hate to go back to what the definition of is, right? But when they talk about creating a better healthcare, you have to stop and ask for whom, right? And that's for their investors. And the general purpose of healthcare, and if you look at private equity, if you look at most of their pages and everything, or most of their statements, mission statements and everything else, it is basically they're going to come in and they're going to help create efficiencies and help make these doctors' practices more profitable. And they're going to do so, and most of their deals are all worked around a 5-year program. They'll openly admit that what they hope to do is they come in, they influx some capital, they put some cash in the doctor's pockets, and then what they plan on doing is within 5 years, they expect to be taking double-digit profits back out of that very entity that they put the money into. Now, they're not doing it by raising the cost or raising the reimbursement to any of these doctors, because doctors' monies came down. So where is that money coming from? They can't cut the number of doctors because they're already there. So what they're really taking away is the admin, the medical assistants, the overhead, all the other things that have been allowing these doctors to even do the volume that they're doing now. They're having to take a piece away from it. They're not putting anything back, and that's a real challenge. And maybe PE in retail and in other businesses and stuff could play a real good role and a real value. But I think we also have to really understand and be careful of, in almost any other business, the purpose of business is growth, right? The more tickets you can sell to sporting events, the more clothes you can manufacture, the more cars that you can sell. The more that you can sell, the better you create revenue. But healthcare shouldn't be about that. It was never about that. It's about taking care of an existing base of patients that need help. They're sick patients. They come to us, for that help and whatnot. So insurance companies, hospitals, and now PE is probably the worst, will always look at healthcare from the revenue down. The reason that we want physicians more involved, and you need to move the money and stuff back towards the physician, is even though they're not perfect, physicians will almost always look at healthcare from the patient up. That's where we need to rebuild and fix healthcare, because it's not a retail, it's not a product.
Yeah, it's not a commodity, it's not a product, it's a service, it's life-changing. Talk to us about what you've seen, because I remember when we were on a couple of different occasions at that surgery conference we were both speaking at. What have you seen PE does with practices? You had mentioned something about acquiring, gutting, and then essentially bankrupting practices. Like what's that all about?
Well, there has been a couple of instances where some of them have bankrupted, it takes it down because, like I say, if you're running on the margin that the physicians are running on right now, and I think what we're just starting to see is the front wave of this, and I don't have a crystal ball, I don't know where it will go other than just you look at the numbers and stuff and they don't work. If the goal of PE is to get in and get out in the 5-year period of time, they have to show a substantial amount of wealth creation for that entity, because all that PE talks about now is the second bite, right? The first bite of the apple is when they come in and they give these physicians a fairly large piece of capital. So it's called a capital event with these physicians. Then they take what they call is the scrape off the top of it. And if you look at it, it's structured such that basically, if you look at the books of these practices and these groups, at the 5-year mark, whatever capital they've influxed into your group or put you into liquid capital, they've taken back out in the scrape. So at that 5-year mark was what they dangled in front of all these groups was, well, don't worry, when the second bite comes along, when we make you profitable enough that the next group's going to come in and this bigger entity is going to come in and gobble us, and they're going to gobble us for even more, and we're all going to make money. Well, at least in MSK, what we're starting to see is they're hitting that 5-year window. And because these doctors groups were so lean, there doesn't appear to be these second bites. I don't think there's any one single second bite, because what's happened is these big groups that are supposed to come in and gobble it up, look at it, the margins just aren't there. But what does happen is the PE company is pretty happy, because if you look at the amount of money that they're pulling out of that every year, they're doing pretty well. It's a pretty good return on their investment. Most of us, if we could get a 15 to a 25% return on our investment year over year in, we'd be pretty happy. I would retire a lot earlier, than I would have before. So they're just staying in the game. But now what you've done is you've taken that revenue away from those physicians, and they can't work hard enough to go. And I hear a lot of grumbling. I'm hearing people from groups and stuff that they're now talking about basically what they may end up having to do is disband their group. Maybe it means actually bankruptcy or whatever, but the only way that they can now get back out of that contract and that agreement would be to step away from that group and then reinvent themselves and come back all over. And I don't see where that's healthy or good for any of these practices or the patient or healthcare as a whole.
No, you lose your insurance contracts. You almost can't start back over right now in this atmosphere, and disheartening. That's why we don't see people coming out of residency, coming out of fellowship, going directly into private practice. And that's what you'd have to do, is basically go into private practice again with your own competition that you built right next door.
It's interesting on our journey as we've talked to a lot of these doctors and everything else. I've got the opportunity to spend a lot of time with fellows and residents, especially ones that came out within the last 3 years or so. And the business cycle, right now the trend has been quite a bit. When I got into this, about halfway through my career in this industry, the big thing when you went to the meetings was 2 or 3 times some doctor from the podium would ask the question of the room, how many people here are in private practice? And the majority of the hands would go up. And then the next question would be, how many of you are employed by the hospitals? And it was a smaller number of hands, right, that would go up. But the interesting question was, the third question that followed that always was, how many of you believe within the next 5 years you will have to become employed to stay alive? And almost every hand would go up into the room, and stuff like that. And that's the trend we saw, and we've watched it happen. But it hasn't worked well. And now what we're seeing is as I talk, and in my journey to talk to a lot of these residents and fellows, as I talk to the ones that went into hospital employment, about 20 to 25% of them basically just didn't want the responsibility of starting a practice. I mean, not everybody's an entrepreneur. And that's fine. There's always be a role for hospital employed hospitals or hospital employed doctors. And I don't think that the private physicians ever want it to be all private, but being in private practice should be an option. When you talk to the other 75%, what almost all of them will tell you is that if I could have afforded to invest in the ancillaries, such as the ambulatory surgery centers, the imaging, the other sources of revenue, I would have went into private practice. But without being able to do that, right? These guys are just getting out of their residency or fellowship. They've got no work history. They're carrying $350,000 to $400,000 in student debt. federal law. These big entities like these insurance companies and hospitals have lobbied to get things like the Stark Law, which doesn't even allow an ambulatory surgery center to loan a resident money to buy into their surgery center. So they can't even get into the surgery center. And then they become indentured servants, more or less. The first couple of years, it's really good. They get paid really well. But then they get stuck in the cycle. And then pretty soon they start to change the RVUs. They start to change their bonus structures. But now they own their insurance contracts. They own everything they can. And we've got this non-compete law that kind of has been turned over. We should talk about that a little bit. But these guys now, and young men and women, they worked hard for 5 years, 4 years to establish themselves and build a practice, whatnot. And if they do want to leave that employment, they have to leave that town. They can't even keep their relationship with those patients because of the non-compete clause. They got to literally start from scratch. How is that even reasonable?
Neil, what do you think about all this? Yeah, Neil, as you hear what Marty's sharing with regard to the private equity side and just the challenge here, what's your reaction?
I think you're obviously preaching to the choir in a lot of this. I love that you share that your background being a rep and supporting physicians from that angle and what you're doing now. But you're describing a lot of things that I think a lot of reps see. They kind of see the pressure on these doctors. They see and they're privy to these conversations. You mentioned the first bite of the apple. Like the reps kind of can go back and remember that first time where they saw a doctor saying, I met with this PE group. They want me. They said that they're going to do this, and it's just big smiles. And then that first bite of the apple, and all the dynamics of this relationship changes. There's 30 device companies that get brought to the table, and they say, who's going to give us the bare minimum pricing, and they slash everything, and then the doctor is no longer using the product that he wants, and he feels like he's not taking care of it. We've all seen it, and they're trapped in there. You got me going right now, Marty, because I'm just like, we got to get more of the reps educated about this too, to help protect doctors from themselves or these situations. I
think it's been happening for a long time. If you look at the manufacturing world and if you look at the hospital world, and this has always boggled my mind as a decent business person and stuff, you don't have to take too far of a step back to kind of understand how things happen. If you asked a CEO or C-suite people at the hospital, and even if you ask a lot of the C-suite of the manufacturers about the doctor-rep relationship, they'll almost immediately tell you and act as if, well, we had to hire their best friend if we wanted them to use our product, and they've always wanted to break that relationship. And I say, folks, take a step back and look what happened. We weren't best friends with these doctors when we started. We were aligned with the doctors. We became their best friends because we earned their respect and because we're aligned. And a quick little deal, I'll just tell you, as a rep, when I walk into a hospital, if I see Dr. X has 10 cases and they're in 2 rooms, right? I look at the board, and the first thing I start to look at is, okay, who's the staff in the first room? Who's the nurse? Who's the scrub tech stuff? Who's the staff in the second room? And you see, ooh, okay, the scrub tech in the second room doesn't have a lot of ortho experience. So I'm going to head to room 2, and I'm going to go help pull instruments. I don't walk in the door and say, what policy of the hospital am I going to break today to piss somebody off? Right? I walk in and I say, look, I'm helping them out. We're literally doing the job that the hospital should be doing and filling that void and that gap, because we're aligned with the physician. We walk in that room and walk in that day and say, okay, we've got 10 cases to do. We need a good outcome or I'm going to lose my business with them. I'm going to get blamed if things don't go right. The doctor cares about the patient. We care about the patient. And regardless of whether we make the same dollar amount, we both are going to get paid the same for that day, whether we're done by 1 o'clock in the afternoon or we're done at 4 o'clock. But we've trained the staff and stuff that the OR nurses and stuff literally a lot of times walk in, they're like, more thinking, oh, great, Dr. X has got 10 cases and I've got room 2. Their mind literally starts to work and starts to think, okay, the first case will take 90 minutes, 10 minutes to get the patient back here. If this patient goes 90 minutes, And then I can add 10 minutes onto that, get the patient out of the room. I'll be at lunch when the fourth patient comes back. And then by the time I get done with my lunch, I come back and they're in the other room doing another 90-minute. And if I can slow it down, then the day shift will take over at 3:15, and I only had to do 2 of the 4 cases. It's alignment. That's what these people need to figure out. And that's why the trend to outpatient, because when these doctors walk into their own outpatient facility, it's not that they're making that much more. They do get to make a little bit more money. They've surrounded themselves with the staff, and everybody's goal is aligned. The goal is to provide the best quality of care that you can provide in a reasonable amount of time, right? And get the best outcome, and then go home.
Mm-hmm. Anthony, there's this article that was posted last month. The title of it is Devalued, Disempowered, and Unseen. Mass General Brigham doctors react to latest merger step. There's a revolt, essentially, of doctors objecting to these consolidations because they see that it's not going to do what they're saying it's going to do on the surface. Can you share the perspective as a doctor to your peers, the need for bravery, and not the kind of bravery that you've got to go like commit some sort of taking moves that are so aggressive you're going to get locked up, because that's not necessary. We're seeing people that are maybe they used to be more timid. Even that doctor strike in Detroit, those emergency medicine doctors, that was also last month, the first strike since 1974. How can we start to encourage and create an environment where we're fostering bravery in healthcare for the patient's sake? Because the patient is the one ultimately suffering in all of this.
But I think, and I've said this on almost every DocNation webinar, is we have to come together as physicians. Physicians is one of the only, you see it in med school, you see it in residency, it's very cutthroat, right? I guess it happens in other professions as well. But at some point, when we're all out of residency and med school, you have to come together, because the physician isn't the center of the medical universe. And if they're not, the only way we're going to survive is by coming together, just like any other herd, right? They're very good at splitting us apart, even to the point where, you know, we see it on LinkedIn, right? People fighting back and forth all the time. And you don't see insurance companies fighting back and forth, right? Cigna, United, Blue Cross Blue Shield. They understand if they all just keep their heads down and keep pushing through, they're just going to keep siphoning off the top. Physicians have to come together. That's the end all and be all. And we got to put our egos aside. I think it's kind of embarrassing when some physicians kind of belittle other physicians in a public forum, right? That can be done behind closed doors if you want to have a good conversation, a healthy conversation about what's going on. But when it happens, you know, on LinkedIn, which is a public forum, it just makes us all look weaker. And that's what we need, is we need to all come together. And that's what DocNation is trying to do. And just even with this simple petition that we have out there, just to hopefully stop next year's Medicare cuts. That's the goal of this petition. It just blows my mind sometimes that people won't sign it. And I don't understand why they wouldn't sign it. You know, we have to come together. It's either we're going to come together, the whole system is going to fall apart, because it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable for the patient, not sustainable for the physician. I mean, one poll that I'd love to see is poll every physician out there and ask them whose kids are going into medicine. Yeah. That's a scary poll, because I always joke, no one fails out of you know, finance and goes into medicine, right? You fell out of med school maybe and go into medicine.
So
it used to be the best and the brightest, right? It used to be the best and the brightest, and now it'd be tough for me to tell my kids to go into medicine right now if they're smart enough to go into finance or even become a lawyer. They still have more, you know, ability to be on their own and not be owned, if you will.
Well, it still needs to be the best and the brightest, right? It does need to be.
The next wave is not going to be. I mean, we can already see that. Go to colleges right now and look where the top people are going to graduate school and what they're doing. They're all going into finance, which is what these healthcare companies are, what these PE companies are. They're just a bunch of finance people and business people making money to make money. There's no real reason to have these people.
Dr. G, I'm going to tell you this real quick. right? I think we talked about this in the past, right? Remember how you'll hear those guys that were watching like the NBA playoffs are on right now, right? Oh, this NBA, they're not as good as they used to be. They used to go after each other. They used to be competitive. It used to be tough. And now these guys, they're just friends. It's like, yes, of course they are. This is 3 collective bargaining agreements away from what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And you're all getting paid.
So what does that mean, Neil? Explain that.
That's what we
It's
need in medicine.
that league back then was very cutthroat. It was a pressure cooker. It had some socioeconomic problems that were involved in it, where these guys weren't getting paid much. They didn't have a voice. And so they were just going after each other's necks because what else is there to do? Right? You're so far down this road of giving your whole entire life to this sport.
But
What
the
else?
way too, and that what people see in medicine is, in order for me to do better, my guy down the street needs to do worse.
Worse. That's it.
And that was that's what you saw in sports. In order for me to do better financially, I had to beat up this guy and make him look bad. And that's what's happening in medicine. Now, if you look at all major sports, but I think it's a great example, they all rise together. I mean, the money these guys are getting is because they have representation. It's because they have a union. And I wish people would see that. I mean, look at the nurses. Nurses don't really fight amongst each other between hospitals anymore at all, right? Why would they? They know that if we all do better, we're all going to rise together. They have a union behind them. It needs to happen in the physician world. We have to come together. We have to form a union. We have to stop beating each other up.
And look at where that conversation, that little snippet started, right? The best of the best into medicine. Okay. When medicine was first founded, the people that founded it were actually brilliant. They knew that you needed the best of the best. You needed the smartest people to be in it. But they also believed that business shouldn't be what a doctor was necessarily taught, right? When you come upon a patient suffering from an appendectomy, right? Their ability to pay shouldn't change your diagnosis and treatment. If you come on an open tib-fib fracture, their ability to pay shouldn't affect your diagnosis and treatment. So they did 2 things. They structured it such that it brought in the best of the best. They paid them enough that it attracted and brought the best of the best. But nobody became a billionaire, like Taylor Swift being this young billionaire by being a doctor. One of the things that's different about doctors and the basketball players in the NBA and stuff like that is, quite honestly, our schools groomed them totally the other way. So you had a point in time with the NBA where, in the middle of that very first strike, when things were bad, there was a point in time when they said that if that strike would have went for another 2 weeks, over 65% of the players in the NBA would have had to declare bankruptcy. They had to get it out. And these were people that were, on average at that time, were making $2 million a year. And they couldn't even manage their money enough there. They had nowhere else to go, right? This is the scary thing that we're seeing in medicine that we better address and stuff, because these physicians are smart enough that if they want to go towards finance, if they want to go towards being a CEO, and they want to go do these other things, they'll go do it. As we make medicine less attractive, we're losing the best of the best. And they're trying to devalue it. I mean, I was kind of staunch with this. In an OR, I had doctors that were friends of mine that would ask me to address them by their first name. I wouldn't do it. If we were out socially having dinner with our family and stuff, and I said, hey, call me John. Okay, that's a different scenario. But there's a reason for the doctor. There's a reason that you now see terms like providers instead of doctors. These hospitals want they're starting to brace for that exodus of the best going away, so that they can make it replaceable with a PA. And I'm not trying to devalue what a PA does or do. They work hard to get there, but they weren't the same level, or we would have called them doctors when they started. An RN is not a doctor. They're good at what they trained and what they did. They're trying to devalue that, to take that away. And as that happens, we, the patients, the people, we lose, because we no longer get the best of the best. Because why? Why would they? And there's an old saying, that when a ship goes down, the rats that can swim will leave first, right? So the best of the best and the smartest are the ones that are going to go away. You're not going to lose the mediocre and the lower end of the poll. You're going to lose the ones that can go do what else they want to do.
I just heard a great saying from one of my colleagues. He said, medicine is the hardest thing to get it was the hardest thing ever to get into, and I worked the hardest I ever worked in my life. He goes, now I'm working even harder to get out of it.
Yep.
You know, everyone's looking for that angle, unfortunately, to get out of medicine, when it should just be the hardest part for a physician should be getting into medicine. And then once you're in medicine, it should be you do, you know, what you like, what you enjoy, take care of patients, and not have to worry about all these outside pressures, financially, administration, insurance coming at you saying you can't practice the way you want to practice. It's crazy to me though, and you're 100% right, Marty. The physicians I know are really smart people, and they're going to find a way around this, and it is going to be left with whoever's left. And we already see the decline in healthcare in America because of this.
Mm-hmm. And here's the deal with that too. And let's take it back to the private equity piece of it. And it's not just the private equity, the physician employment, you know, and everything else. How is it that we allow the powers to be, the insurance companies, the CEOs, the private equity people, to sell the American public the fact that it's okay for a business person, you know, that trained on nothing but P&L statements, is paid and judged purely by profit and loss, not about the patient care and whatnot, to profit off of medicine. But it's not okay for a physician to reform themselves and be a businessman in the craft that they trained in and they love so much. They have to leave being a doctor because of Stark laws and stuff. And as soon as a physician starts to use that intellect to actually raise their revenue, raise their money, we tag them as greedy and we say, hey, look, we need pre-authorizations to protect you from that rogue surgeon, right? That's going to do procedures that they should do. Shouldn't the answer be, if you're an insurance company and you've got a network, right? For you to provide care within an insurance deal, you have to be one of the in-network doctors for the most part. If you're an in-network doctor and they need pre-authorization to stop you from doing rogue surgeries, isn't the real solution you should remove that doctor from your network? But they don't want to do that because they're making so much money off these doctors. They just want to keep them down. And as I said a little while ago, earlier in the deal, we should encourage and embrace physicians that want to remain physicians, but to be businessmen. Because at the end of the day, they still look at healthcare from the patient up. If I'm a hospital CEO and I'm doing a procedure and I'm making money off of a procedure and I'm negotiating for the cost of that procedure, any cut I take in that procedure comes out of my top line, could come away from my dividends, stuff like that. If I'm a physician, I get the exact same professional fee for doing the procedure in a hospital that I get for doing it in my own ASC, right? But if in my ASC, I can make a little bit more money because I'm an owner. Why do we have a moratorium to stop doctors from being owners of the hospital when the cost to do that procedure in the surgery center is a third or a fifth of what it is in the hospital? Because a physician is a lot more apt to take a smaller cut of that facility fee, because anything they make in that facility fee is more than they were going to make before. Yet we embrace these CEOs and these people that are trained, Harvard trained, and everything else, that don't provide anything to the care of the patient. We celebrate them making $20 million a year. We begrudge an orthopedic surgeon or a physician that makes $200,000 to $500,000 a year, right? We live in a society that celebrates Jay-Z and Beyonce being a billionaire. We'll flock to concerts and we applaud them. We begrudge a physician that spent their whole life training and dedicated to take care of a patient for making $500,000 a year. How did we get here?
That's a great point.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I wanted to add on to that, Marty, too, just the scenarios in the states that have certificate of need that prevent physicians from having ASCs and they're funneling things to the hospital. I'm like, how is any of this acceptable and legal? This is all the way to the top of the legislature of the state.
Yeah.
Like, but to Dr. G's point, this has been the problem all along. Physicians were taught, first of all, you competed to get into medical school. Then you competed to get into a residency. You competed if you wanted to get into a fellowship. And then you competed for the job in a practice, and we've done such a good job of dividing these physicians. Then we throw Stark laws and stuff on and anti-collusion laws that make them play by a totally different game, right? But somehow that's one of the things that we got to fix from their side, because physicians were taught for too long, look, do right by the patient, keep my head down, work hard, and the money takes care of itself until it doesn't. And we're at that point now. Physicians have to figure that out and start to come together and say, wait a minute, we're stronger together than we are apart. And you hear all this talk about the unions and stuff. I'll challenge people and stuff right now. Physicians have something that's better and stronger than a union right now. You don't need a union, because unions kind of are the same way. They're good until they no longer represent you anymore. Physicians have the power of the script. And the hospitals stole it from them years ago. And all of you doctors signed a deal when you go in. They said, look, doctor, they inundated you with paperwork. And then when they chased you down and said, doctor, you need to sign your charts or you can't do any more work in here and whatnot. Then they came to you with a solution and said, look, we can make this easier for you. Just put your signature on file. Then you don't have to sign these 6 scripts. But in the meantime, what they did was they took your power. A hospital cannot legally negotiate the price to buy an implant, nor can they bill for an implant. They can't admit a patient without the script of a physician. They can't assign a lab. They can't get an x-ray. They can't do any of this. All these things happen on the physician script. One of the things physicians need to do is come together and get together with each other. Take back your script. Remove that signature from file and make them present you each one of those so that you can talk to them about each individual deal that you're signing off from. You control money. The only reason PE is standing there wanting to talk to all you people is nothing happens in healthcare without the physician, their hard work, their relationship with the patient, and their script. And that's what PE wants. That's what the hospitals want. That's what the physicians have. Own it.
I think that's the soundbite right there.
I agree. Marty, how is your I want to because I was very interested when I talked to you about 2 weeks ago. How or what are you guys doing at your company to help give some of that power back to the physician?
So what we discovered and what we looked at, the journey that my partner and I took was when we realized that there was only so many hours in the day and that you couldn't work and that we wanted to really stay in what we did and enjoy it. We started looking for how can physicians make money for doing something they're doing already. And we went down the road with a lot of different DME things. This was back just before the pod deals started happening, and then people started with the pods. I don't look good in orange, and sometimes I drop the soap in the shower. So there's a couple of premises that I just lines that I just won't cross, nor will my partner. So we started looking at some things on how we could make physicians money, but we wanted to do it legally. So we started going to DC. We started meeting with the Department of Justice. We presented a business plan. We paid a lot of money to attorneys. I mean, my partner and I put a lot of money into attorneys. And the litmus test always was, look, somebody could end up wearing orange. You know, we wanted to bring doctors together and purchase DMEs bulk and then sell them and everything else. And literally one night we got sitting and we were watching the March Madness. And we were talking about when we were in college, how we were smarter than Vegas and the bookies, and how we were going to pay for our tuition because I knew this weekend better than Vegas who was going to win, right? And it didn't work out very well. I didn't pay for my tuition, didn't pay for that stuff. But we quickly realized the bookie doesn't care who wins or who loses, right? They make their money. A perfect bet for the bookie is really a 50-50 bet. So we asked ourselves sitting there, who's the bookie in medicine? And what we got looking at was finance. The reality of physicians is physicians float an astronomical amount of money. And it really hurts them in a lot of ways because it's that float that people put out in front. People say, look, you know, this doctor, you know, made, you know, $500,000 last year. But they then forget to say, however, their overhead ran 61%, right? And then out of that, they pay 38% in taxes, you know, when it comes down to it. So when you look at the $1,004 that a physician gets today to do a total joint, most patients, because these big companies have leveraged the thought that the relationship with the patient is with the doctor. So because of that, when that patient gets that bill for 100,000 and it gets negotiated down to 64,000 or 63,000, their mind automatically assumes, man, that doctor made good money doing my hip, right? They don't stop to realize that that doctor got paid 1,000 for. You take away 61%, that takes them down to under 500. You take away 34%. These guys and gals are getting about $290 to do that procedure, and they're having to do it so much in the volume. So what we looked at was within the financial world, what we found was by having physicians come together in a bank holding company, it's outside of Stark. There's no referral issues. There's no inducements for referrals or anything else. And we hope that the bank, bringing them into the bank holding company, does two things. It becomes a repository for physicians to find common ground, that instead of competing with the doctor across the street, we can both have ownership in the same entity, that we can be help furthering our causes and moving it forward. We can break the barrier that they put in. How many family practice doctors and even anesthesiologists get frustrated with the orthopedic doctors because, well, I refer these patients to them, but they won't let me invest in their surgery center. They won't let me invest in their MRI. Even the family practice doctors don't stop thinking, wait a minute, it's not the doctor. It's Stark laws that says you can't invest in this entity too, because they want physicians divided. The thing with the financial institute and the bank holding company, by bringing these doctors in, we can bring family practice, we can bring anesthesia, we can bring cardiologists, we can bring gastroenterologists. And now that they're in an entity that's outside of Stark, we can now use the horsepower, the same thing that the insurance companies did, to collectively start making medicine better. And I'm fully convinced that when we do that, the doctors will do it with the patient's best interest in heart. We'll be able to reduce the overall cost of healthcare, right? We'll be able to make physician-patient interactions better, let them spend more time together, simply by allowing them to control the financial aspect of the business that they're in. And it's a big chunk of money, you know, when you think about how much money.
What does this capital then get used for?
Capital gets used for a whole lot of things. Right now, one of the biggest deals that PE will come to you and tell you is to say, look, small doctors group with 15, 20, 30 doctors. With us, we can make you a bolt-on into this other group. And then we have the horsepower to go get the capital you need to build your own surgery center, right? All they're going to do is borrow the money and then put the doctor's name on that loan anyway, but they put bigger. If you've got a financial institute that understands these physicians' practices and understands how it does it, we eliminate the need for you to partner with the hospital, partner with the private equity group.
Yeah.
If it makes sense, it makes sense. But also the other thing that we can do by being involved in a financial institute, stuff like this, I've seen the other side of it. And what we help to also solve is I've been at the medical meetings where the doctor in rural Nebraska that's in a partnership with 5 doctors in a community of 20,000 comes to the meeting in Las Vegas or San Francisco, and they see Dr. X stand up and do a presentation on they ended up investing in, and our group bought an MRI, and basically now we're generating X amount of revenue, you know, off of this MRI. And these guys go home and say, we need to buy an MRI, right? Well, if your only source of money is the manufacturer that manufactures their MRI, they say, heck yes, we'll loan you that $1 million for an MRI, but not sit and talk to them about the fact that physicians investing in an MRI in a population of 20,000 with only 6 partners, you're going to go bankrupt. You're going to lose the money. You're going to end up losing that magnet. We hope to bring bankers and financial people in, and doctors will be these bankers. They own 80% of this. They'll be involved in all these financial decisions. So you can sit down and you can say, no, look, I know that gentleman was making money. Today, an MRI doesn't make anybody money because they've cut the reimbursements so far down. But the conversations will be quite different. Will be, look, here's your community. This is why that's a bad investment. But we know your practice and we've looked at it. You guys aren't offering any physical therapy. Let us help put funding and money together. Let us loan you the money. Let's sit down and do the numbers, and with your demographics, let's open up a physical therapy within your department. We might have to expand your building to put it under the roof to make it part of the deal. But let's look at the things that we can help you on your journey that will help you make money, provide better care for your patients, and not have to work as hard. And if you look at some of the better, well-run groups, what you're starting to see now is I've got to sit on some of these presentations. We're down to some of these larger groups. The physician's revenue is only 40% patient interfacing. The rest of the money is these ancillaries. And what it's allowing them to do is because they're offering those other ancillaries, they're able to better serve their patient. They're able to spend a little bit more time with the patient rather than turning them over to a PA and an MA, right? They're able to spend a little bit more time in the OR on that case. They don't get as worried about having it done in 30 or 40 minutes because they don't just get paid their professional fee, they get paid for the facility fee. So if it takes them a little bit longer time to do it, they do it. And that's the role that we want to play in. And that's what we want to do is we want to give the mental health, some of the mental health and security back and keep the brightest of the bright in medicine and all aspects of medicine.
So you're talking about giving them a way for them to own more of what their business and their practice is involved with, and not only encouraging them to do that, you've actually created a vehicle that they can actually pull it off.
Stop and think about this. We talked about United Health. We started this journey tonight with United Health. $25 billion profit in 1 quarter. First of all, think about the fact that they've gotten so big that they don't even report annually because the number would be so big that, you know, if they had to report $100 billion in profit, people might actually go to the streets with pitchforks and torches and stuff like that. When insurance came about, for Baylor Healthcare was the first place in Dallas, Texas that did the very first insurance product, and it was with the Teachers Institute, and it was literally 50 cents a day was the insurance that they charged in this deal. And what they did was, insurance was noble when it started because the concept was if we take a little bit of money from a whole lot of people, we have a pool to protect people against those catastrophic events in their life. Okay. But now what's happened is they no longer do that. They've gotten such a big pool. They're nothing but a money and a care administrator. And that's why they're not making, United Healthcare didn't make $25 billion last quarter because more people had catastrophic events in their lives than paid insurance into their deal, right? If we can move that money and buy the physician stuff in, what we need to do is help take the patients and move them away from the focus of the cost of healthcare. Insurance companies and hospitals want you to talk afraid of the $100,000 total joint, the $50,000 cancer deal, nothing else. We need to focus them on the spend. And doctors have always been about the spend. And doctors in the past took eggs from poor farmers to treat them. And we've bastardized that and said, doctors are so greedy, they took eggs. No, doctors knew their patient so well. They knew that that patient wouldn't come and see them because of pride if they didn't have a way to pay. And more times than not, they passed it off somewhere else. Having the physicians at the heart and soul of this, ultimately, we could even move towards self-insurance, which ultimately is the way that things need to go. And HSAs, where patients have a skin in the game and the actual spending of the money where they go. And having the people that actually provide the care, the physicians, involved in that decisions and building healthcare from the patient-physician relationship up. That's how we'll fix healthcare.
So we have a question in the chat or the Q&A section. So feel free, as we're going to be wrapping up here soon. If you have a question for Marty or for one of the DocNation founders, we'd love to hear from you. This is from an orthopedic surgeon who just finished residency and is now starting fellowship this fall. And they say they're horrified by the move to private equity. They have offers from a private group who is looking to sell to PE versus a hospital group. What can I do to protect myself? Do I have to look for another private group in a location that is not my ideal location? What's your reaction?
I think there's a couple of things you can do. I mean, one of the things that's really exciting to me is as the shift has gone back to the private medicine, get involved with DocNation. I mean, this is a neat, sit down and talk to them. Start your journey now. You're a year or so away. Start talking to people that are looking at, not necessarily saying that being in private practice is the only means to do it, but people that think and believe that private practice should be and is a means. if you don't mind me plugging somebody else, Amanda Hill is an attorney out there now. There's a couple of them, these attorneys that are purely focusing on helping doctors negotiate contracts without non-competes, helping physicians that if they want to be independent, get independent. There's organizations such as mine that's working with this. Start looking around at the people that want to help you remain independent. Now, if you end up going into employment and stuff for a while, just be aware of what it is and try to protect yourself the best. If you think it's a stepping stone, then doing it in a community that may not be your end game is a pretty good idea. And by the way, I think most people statistically, I think most doctors switch practices after the first 2.5 years anyway.
Yep.
So that's not really a bad
No.
way to go. But
No.
surround yourself with these organizations, and you know, Justin, you and I fight this a lot. We sit at these trade shows, you know, stuff. We spend money to support the organizations that these residents and fellows are going to, but we don't have these shiny objects and stuff sitting on top of our tables. And like it or not, a lot of these doctors, they want to go to where they can see the newest instrument, the newest gizmo, the newest tech. But take a look at some of these other booths and the people like DocNation and stuff that's there, and go talk to them. You know, reach out, stick your hand out, and ask them what they do and how they can help you on your journey, because there's a lot of these organizations that are really trying to help you guys out. You got to help yourself out too.
Neil or Anthony, what do you think about that? Would you suggest that they try to negotiate their contract to have a clause, an out clause, that if it does go to PE, that gives them some freedom to make moves, or should they pursue something else altogether?
I mean, I've seen a lot of people sign their first private group job and they get sold to PE in the first year and everything changes, right? Happens to a lot of us. And usually there is a moment there where your old contract is voided. You'll have to sign a new contract with the new PE group. So that should save you. The hard part is you're kind of left out if you don't sign it.
What about the incentives though? They might have incentives that they were provided to them.
Yeah.
Sign bonus, relocation, bonuses that could get called back.
It will get called back. Yeah. Once the PE group takes over, it's a totally new contract. You're signing a new contract with a new team. There's nothing that the private group you're with can really, I mean, you may be able to say, you know, if you sell to PE, you owe me an out of X amount of money. You may be able to do that, have that in there. I don't know if that'll get by. I think that is one out that'll make you feel a little more comfortable. The biggest thing is to not have a non-compete, because if they sell to PE and you have a non-compete, then you have to move, and that's really gonna be tough, right? If you don't take the job with the PE, so trying to get rid of the non-compete would be my first move, and maybe trying to get an out clause or a severance clause where you get X amount of severance if they sell to PE and you don't come on with them. But the whole contract will change. You'll get a whole new contract with a new PE group. You'll have a whole new tax ID. Everything changes. Rarely have I heard it's for the better, but you know, the only really people that make out when private practice sells to PE, and even nowadays is not as good, are the partners. Everyone else gets a rough deal, and there's a lot of guys out there that reach out to me in the last 2 years that have been, you know, out for 3 or 4 years and their group just sold PE and they're kind of sitting there holding the bag. And most of them unfortunately do sign with the PE group, and then they're just kind of sitting there treading water saying, hey, what am I going to do next? And a lot of people unfortunately never make that next move, because they're kind of what we go back to. Physicians aren't good at business. We aren't good at making moves. We aren't good at pivoting. That is one reason you really need DocNation in your quarter for this kind of situation. But it happens a lot. And right now, you know, if you're signing on a private practice group, you should expect it to sell to PE within the next 5 years, the way the landscape is looking.
Yeah, what a wonderful opportunity and time to get DocNation involved. I'd say this to anyone that is, you know, going into any new contract, any new work environment. It's a short answer to your question, Justin. It's both. No non-compete and an out clause for when private equity comes. Private equity enters this conversation, everyone's under the gun. This is not going to be the first job. This is not going to be the job that was explained to you. So it's both. It's a new day.
Yeah, I think about this question, and is this the only opportunity that's in front of you? with the supply of doctors and the demand for you and the physician shortage, there's really no better time to make deals with employers. If back in the 1980s, 75% of doctors were in charge, and now it's swung to maybe 25% of doctors are in charge, it's the exact opposite. We're hearing people already, there was something we were talking about beforehand, like 70% of doctors are wanting to get out of being under the umbrella and get into their own practice. It's just a question of how can they do it? What's the pathway to make that possible? Because you're tired of being shackled. And so if this is the only opportunity, I would really consider what else might be out there, because there's likely more openings than doctors to fill those openings, which should come into favor for you.
Well, I mean, there's an artificial shortage. I mean, physicians, you should be able to kind of go, you know, where you want to go and whatnot. I think what's been missing, and like I said, one of the things that brought Justin and I together and what really attracted me to DocNation was the fact that there are now these entities that are really looking to try to bridge the gap and try to help physicians remain, you know, independent. And as Dr. G said, physicians have to come together. You got to use those resources. You got to go to the people that want to help you independent. You got to help support the other physicians, you know, and get together. There's places where you compete, but for the most part, you're stronger together, you know, than you are apart. And there's nothing wrong there. It's your relationship. They're your patients. Without you, without the physicians, none of this can happen. That's why PE's lined up outside the door, you know, at the same show that a doctor's showing their reimbursement being cut and their overhead going up. I mean, that's a slide that for GE, for anybody like that, those CEOs would be getting fired. Yet for some reason, PE's standing out there wanting to buy or hire you or bring you into practice. Ask yourself why.
Yeah, why is that? You know, you mentioned earlier about athletes and the NBA, and that reminds me of a book that I really enjoyed reading called Free to Choose by Milton Friedman. Talked about how back in the day, people thought that the only way to gain more wealth was to take it from other people. It was the only way you could do it was to conquer. That's why you had king and kingdom, one after the other, just going and conquering. It's just like this scarcity mindset. There's only a limited amount of raw materials out there to go take over. And then eventually things change. And with economic development, innovation, advances, technological change, all these things, international trade, all these things just showed that you can actually create wealth by building, inventing, creating, and coming together as a team. And so I'd love to have maybe us wrap up with talking about how doctors can come together. What does that look like? Have you seen any examples of that? There might be another question that's popped up too that we can hit.
So I think answering this question is it.
Oh,
it's
okay.
coming together, right? The short answer here is, so any private practice can go PE. Does this mean that we should always have an exit strategy in our contract if any practice sells to PE? The short answer is yes. Right? This is get representation. This is get part of DocNation. This is tell a friend about DocNation. This is come together, share best practices. You've got to protect yourself. The answer is yes. This is the example of us coming together. We're not, you know, hiding these secrets. We're going to be telling these secrets every month. We're going to meet right here and we're going to give you the best practices, the secrets. This is us coming together, I think. That's what I'm excited about, at least.
Find these organizations, and DocNations is one, there's someone out there that want to make money with you, not on you.
Yes.
Well said.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Reach out to us. Questions. If you're starting out, you're considering a transition, you've got big things happening. If you got questions, you got issues with partners, whatever might be that you're dealing with, talk to us about it. We solve problems. That's why we exist. We want you to be more in control, have more freedom, get more time back. Please go check out, it looks like Betsy put in the chat the petition to stop the Medicare cuts. Tell a friend about that. We'd love to see you next month. Share that with a friend, have them come too as well. And if you have a topic that you'd love to have us speak on, feel free to share those too. We have a huge bench of all kinds of speakers and experts on all kinds of topics. So we'd love to dig into some of that with you. And feel free to reach out, email, phone calls, anything you would prefer. It doesn't matter. Just reach out, and we're happy to get a time with you. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Marty.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. This has
Thanks,
been
Marty.
great conversation.
Thank you, Marty.